life can be, will be stormy. Stuff will come for you in this life. And the question is then, where are your foundations? What is going to get you through? And he says, if you put into practice my teachings, you will be like a wise builder, building your life on the firm foundations that we sang about today. Now, one thing I love is that Jesus doesn't say, if the storms come. And yet so often, myself included, can believe, well, if I put into practice what Jesus says, then the storms won't come. As though somehow we can appease God, or we kind of act a little bit superstitious. Say, oh, if I'm really good and really holy, then nothing bad's ever going to come to me. But Jesus doesn't say that. Jesus also doesn't say, well, because I'm an all-loving God, no storm or trial or tribulation or, the stuff of life is ever going to arrive at your door. No, Jesus doesn't say that. He says, when the storms come. He says it twice. In fact, he says, the rain came down, the streams rose up, and the wind blew about it. The storms are coming from every angle, whether you are a Christian or a non-Christian. The question then is, what will happen to you when you do? What will happen to your mental health when the stuff of life, the normal stresses of life, come to you? So point one is, storms will come. The question is then, what's going to happen to us? The World Health Organization defines mental health then as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal storms and stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. Now, quite often psychologists like myself then try to answer this question by creating diagrams. They say, okay, when stress and the storms of life come, what happens to us? Where does distress come from, and how do we get through it and get past it, and then what's the result of that? And we come up with little diagrams. If you're on the YouVersion Bible app, I've uploaded one of these kind of simplified diagrams, but it says, stress comes. Then there's three different types of people. On one hand, we have people who seem to kind of get through it. They're knocked off balance a little bit, but ultimately their balance is kind of restored and they get on with life. On the other side, though, and I think for a lot of people, transformation occurs. Sometimes for the worse, and Jesus talks about that we can succumb to the stresses of life, that it takes us out by kind of our ankles at the foundations, that we crumble and fall. And the other transformation is what we might call kind of this post-traumatic growth, that something happens to us, which basically is life-changing, quote, psychological shifts in thinking and relating to the world and to ourselves that contribute to a personal process of change that is deeply meaningful. So sometimes in the stresses and the storms of life, they make us more grateful for the life that we have. Sometimes it means we know what deeper connection to other people is like, or deeper connection to God. Transformation can occur. Now, psychologists then say, okay, well, if these are the different types of people then that we have after a storm and the stresses of life, what's the difference? What distinguishes them? And one of the main distinguishing factors is how people cope. People's coping styles or coping strategies. Now, what do I mean by that? A coping strategy, here's a really classic example. I'm stressed with my exams, I've got a deadline that is due tomorrow. And suddenly, instead of me sitting down and applying myself to writing whatever it is for this deadline, I notice how disgustingly dirty my bathroom is. And I spend the next 5 hours distracting myself from the anxiety and stress of this situation by literally, this is a true story, using a toothbrush to scrub the grout between the tiles. I don't know, I've never done that before, but it's a great coping strategy, or at least that's what it feels like in the short term, to deal with my stress and anxiety about the real issue. What about this one? Escapism. Sometimes when the storms of life come, we just want to switch off. Now, you can spend all day sleeping, you can watch about 1 billion episodes of Netflix. Sometimes you can drink too much alcohol as well, just to switch off. Eat loads of food. Go to work, go into the office to escape from maybe some relational difficulties that you've got going on. That's another coping style. Avoidance, a classic one. The bills are coming through the front door. You see them piling up and you think, I can't deal with the stress of my financial stuff at the moment. So I'm going to avoid them by not opening the bills and I'm going to pretend like they don't exist. These are some coping styles. Sometimes even anxiety can be used as a coping style. because we have these positive beliefs that actually the more I worry about something and ask myself, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if? Then, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. And so sometimes anxiety and worry itself can be used as an unhelpful coping strategy. We know that we are in a coping crisis, particularly since the pandemic, with around 1 in 14 of us self-harming as a form of trying to cope with this emotional kind of storm going on and the stresses and the pressures of life. Now, we all have coping styles. Some are helpful, some are unhelpful, some are helpful in the short term, but not in the long term. And Jesus knows this stuff, and he says, hey, point to, what is the solution then to this coping crisis? Put into practice the teachings of Jesus, to make sure that the coping styles that you're using when the storms come are built on the firm foundation. So what do I mean by that? Some of the examples that come from Matthew's gospel. He says, look, are you worried about money and about your finances? Well then, first of all, confront the issue by praying to God about it. Be really honest with him about what's going on for you. And then he says, and do something really practical. He says, pay your taxes. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And he also says, remember to tithe, give back to God all that he has kind of given you in that. So some real principles. He basically says, make the worry that you have productive. In other words, here's some stuff you can do about it. What about this one? Jesus says, do not worry about tomorrow, the what if. For tomorrow will have enough worry of itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. What's Jesus saying? He's saying, be mindful. Try to be a bit more in the present, in the moment. Think about the stuff that is going on today. Invite God into the here and now situation, because God has got tomorrow in his hands, and that stuff is going to happen when it's going to happen. But be mindful, be present of what is going on.
If you enjoyed this video today, why don't you click subscribe and click on that notification bell to get a notification the next time we upload a video. And if you're new or you've been coming to the C3 Church for a little while now, why don't you find out what your next step might be in the journey of faith? Click on the next step link in the description below to find out what your next step in your journey might be.